So have you actually been looking for the running like in recreational joggers? Does it fit? Does it go with the energy
I
expenditure?
haven't done it as much, although I had a graduate student, and she was very interested in the walk to run transition, like when you go from walking to running. And so we had the data, and she's got a paper that's out now. She's published it in abstract form, so I can tell you what she found in the abstract was basically the punchline was 140 steps per minute. Now, I mean,
Mm,
that's what we call a proxy, or what we call a heuristic. It's a guiding value. It's like saying 30 minutes moderate intensity day, or 8 glasses of water a day, or 9 fruits and
mm,
vegetables. I mean, it's a general number to give you some information and some guidance, but it's not intended to be precise, because Ollie, you might transition at a 142 and I might transition at 139, whatever. It's in that global area there. And again, over time, some young researchers could get to a point where they could provide more precision. And why is that important? Well, it helps with coaches. It helps with, for example, those of us that pore over large databases of digital data, where we can say, oh, those people were running, those people were walking slowly, those people were sitting. Like, we could actually see from the data people's behavior at that moment by looking for these values. If we know the mile markers, the thresholds, to be able to say what people are doing based on a couple of numbers.
mm. Yeah, and do you know are there any of the Fitbits using these cadence things in their intensity classification, or how are they doing?
I've seen some people starting to adopt it, yes. And I mean, real-time cadence does take a lot of memory, for devices. So there's only some devices that are doing real-time cadence. Some are
Mm,
providing updates every few minutes. So there's that. It'll continue to improve, but again, even without devices giving you that feedback, it's a very quick cognitive computation. If you're interested in that,
mm,
it's very, very quick and simplistic. But again, also visually, if we have visual recordings, we can get it. So I'm kind of out ahead of some of the instrumentation on this, but it's coming. It's just like when I was out ahead on counting steps, and then the wave of wearables came on after that. So
mm. So do you think we should define for common people the intensities through cadence and not from frisk or some kind of words or heart
well,
rate?
I think we can do all of it. I mean, we don't have to stop using one just because we've brought another definition into the fold. And in fact, I love putting tables together where I can say how this measurement of intensity relates to this measurement, and so on. And there's some overlap, and it depends on how they were defined originally, and so on. But it provides, again, just general knowledge so that people can have a better understanding. But I would still argue that what we have shown is cadence is very strongly related to intensity. And
Mm,
like I say, so much so that we can confidently put heuristic guidances out there. And eventually, we will be able to provide more precise estimates based on a number of personal characteristics. And we're still pulling those
mm,
personal characteristics together, but it keeps getting less fuzzy and keeps getting tighter.
mm. Yeah, and you mentioned that you could see from the video the head bouncing. Have you tried to automatically analyze, for example, from some cameras which are in the street corner, that can you classify the intensity of people walking
I
by?
had a postdoc who was starting to look at it, and then got offered a job and went elsewhere. And maybe he'll continue then. But it was one of those things, as scientists, you start with observation, right? And you say, wow, we're like pigeons when we walk. Our center of mass goes up and down. And whether you put the accelerometer on your belly button or on the top of your head, you're going to get that up and down. And then we went, wow, look, we can see, people's heads bobbing up and down. And we thought, well, we could do it. And so it starts with that sort of observation, and then you have a theory, and then you want to test that. And again, I'm absolutely willing to tell these ideas to the young scientists and say, hey, you go. I'm busy enough nowadays that I'm so happy if others take up the torch and run with it and keep expanding on this information.
Yeah. Sounds really interesting research. And if we move to more the walking behavior throughout the lifespan, could you tell about how does it change from childhood to adulthood and to old age, and what are the kind of interesting findings there?
That's I'm venturing into my biomechanist experts territory here. So again, apologies to any biomechanists out there who think that, what is she talking about? But I know that when they're younger than 6, we don't necessarily always have an adult like pattern of walking yet, but we can still look at ambulation. But definitely, when we started looking at cadence, we've got 6-year-olds and above. So we're very solid in our area because we can get the pattern of walking that we need to look at. But the thing is, during that developmental phase of 6 to, 21 years of age, all the way up to young adulthood, they're growing, and by the time they hit into their teens and they're starting to get that, peak height that they're going to get, their walking is pretty much like an adult. So even in our teens, we were saying that we were finding the same relationship with intensity and cadence pretty much by the time they hit that. Whereas when the younger ones, it's a different pattern. And like I say, we've got funding now to explore that even further. But by the time you got to adulthood, it was pretty much, like I say, 100 and 130 were the moderate and vigorous intensity. And basically, essentially, again, talking from a heuristic point of view, every increase in 10 steps per minute was approximately 1 met. It just kind of worked out that way. I didn't force it. It just worked out that way. And so that was very clear all the way from, 21 to 85 years of age. And people will always say to me, well, what about leg length and height and all that? And we go, you know what? Leg length and height matter when you've got somebody who's like 4'5" and somebody who's 6'4", right? Definitely the extremes, you could see it. But for the majority of people on the bell curve, it wasn't a very strong explanatory variable. And so will it end up eventually in more of our precise, our precision estimates? Yes, because that will be important for the people who are extreme. It will have less of an impact for the people who are more or less your average human height. But like I say, by the time we got into the 80s and so on with the adults we were finding, their cadence and intensity relationship was the same statistically. And when it came to vigorous intensity, you could argue technically it was the same, but there were so few older adults that actually were able to achieve vigorous intensity that it was, like I say, a moot point. Something that it's an interesting technicality, but moot. So it's interesting. But again, for the listeners who are very interested in the data, the papers we've published on there, you can get the data because we made a commitment to making our data fully discoverable. And so they appear as supplementary files in the papers that we've written.
Mm-hmm. So basically you said that the older people are not usually reaching vigorous intensity in walking. Do you think it's more about motor skill or from a metabolic perspective that they cannot do
it? Could be, my first guess, it's a fitness issue. So
All
that's
right.
my first guess. And so if I were to do that study again, I would, we were just getting ambulatory, ostensibly healthy people. If I were to do that specific question again, I would actually recruit older adults who currently run. So people who are used to vigorous exercise, because I'd just like to be curious. I'm just curious on, for those who are fit and who do regularly run and who have the capacity to go 140, 150, 160, even 170 steps per minute. Is vigorous intensity the same as for the young? I suspect it will be, but until somebody gets the evidence, and again, here's an easy study for any graduate student to queue up and do, because I won't be doing it. I think that would be great, just to put that question to rest.
Yeah, and have you been comparing the steps in the modern world to historical records, or somehow for the evolutionary point of
Well,
view?
that's a very interesting question, because I've enjoyed interdisciplinary discussions, and I've had people, anthropologists, sociologists talking to me, and some historical people, and they're trying to figure out the number of steps people would take amongst these different structures and in ancient civilizations and so on. And it's very fascinating to see these sorts of applications. And besides intellectual discourse, I haven't seen anything at this point. But I do know, again, we know that the concept of a mile comes from a Roman word, mille, which is basically 1,000 strides, and a stride being 2 steps. So that's 2,000 steps. So, and that's, even today, for those of us, I mean, I think Dave Bassett was the first to show that, a mile is basically 2,000 steps. Well, I don't think he's first. I mean, the Romans were the first, but he verified it with modern times. And it's approximately 2,000. Again, human beings are not robots. So it's not like everybody suddenly a mile is exactly a 2,000. Of course not, but generally from a, again, heuristic point of view, we can say that and be comfortable with that knowledge.
Yeah, and if we quickly go, what's your take? How many steps do we need per day? It's of course a complex question, but what
it
would
is
you
a
say?
complex question. But myself and then others also have shown that 7,500 steps per day is a good translation of public health guidelines as we understand them today, and others have shown that it has been associated with good health outcomes. My thought also is that just more than you've been taking is, so if you've led a sedentary lifestyle and you're taking 2,500 steps per day, oh my God, if you can get to 5,000 or 6,000, fantastic. Getting to 7,500 is a good mark to get. If you get to 10,000, yay. If you get to 12,500, even better. At this point, we don't know of a number that's considered to be too much. So there are benefits associated all the way up the way. And again, David Bass, I'll give him credit. He was the first to show the highest recorded values at this time were in Amish men living in Canada and not using any mechanical or electronic devices or anything like that. And they were averaging about 18,500 steps per day. And Amish women were 14,500 steps per day. That's averaging with no overuse injuries. The human being is certainly capable of much more than our current sedentary lifestyles.
Yeah, if listeners are interested in this, I had a recording with Andreas Holterman, who's studying blue-collar workers, and they have measured, for example, cleaners and other. And with them, it seems that it's not they are not fit because they don't take any intensive steps. It's all the time low intensity. But that's I think is another story. Do you think we should have guidelines for certain amount of steps with moderate intensity and certain amount of steps with vigorous? Would it be easier to communicate, or do you think the recommendations are doing a good job at the moment?
Well, we've asked that question because we were very interested in it, and again, us and then others have done some looking at this into say, if you consider intensity, does it mean anything more in these large population data sets? And ultimately, for the general population, no. But Ollie, you're absolutely correct. There are individuals, waiters, waitresses, cleaners, and so on, who might be taking a lot of steps but never really breaking that intensity. But they are a small enough portion of a population that the population data say it doesn't matter, because if you tell a person to focus on volume of steps, then it's difficult for the average person who doesn't have one of those types of jobs to accumulate we don't go to the bathroom often enough in a day to get a lot of little steps without doing intensity. We get those through purposeful walking. And so for the grand majority of people, you can just say, get a large number of steps, 7,500, 10,000, 12,000, whatever you want to get in on. You can say that, and you can be very comfortable that they're likely to get purposeful steps shooting for that higher number. So that's the public health message. From a clinical point of view, which means I'm talking to one person at a time in my office, then if I find out that they are a waitress who is taking 18,000 steps per day, but I know they're low level, then that's a conversation I could have with that individual about getting some higher intensity into their life. But across the board, the data doesn't support that it's a necessary thing to emphasize. And from a public health point of view, the simpler we keep the messages, the better.
And have you been looking any patient populations, or have you done only with healthy people?
I started out my work with people with type 2 diabetes. And so, and older adults, and in those populations, I was seeing things like 700 steps per day. And when I first saw that, I was going, no way, that's not possible. But then after interviewing them and getting to know them a little bit and realizing what they don't do in the day, I started realizing that that's quite possible. So I was for a while very interested in extremely low steps per day populations. And I found it was mostly very easy to get them to take more. They'd start from less than 700 steps per day, and I could get them up to 4,500, like within 48 hours, it seemed. And it was just a case of them being aware of what was active. So yes, I have worked with some patient population and patient population data sets, or less ostensibly healthy. So yes, but with regards to cadence, less so. And that is an interesting question, Ollie. That is something that, I'm hoping, I've put a grant in, I'm hoping I can get this, but I'm very interested in, there's a relationship between cadence and intensity such that we can predict an intensity defined metabolically. But there are some conditions like type 2 diabetes where that relationship may be disrupted because their metabolic system is disrupted. And so, for example, with type 2 diabetes, their heart rate isn't really a good indicator. It doesn't fit the norm that we know for the relationship with intensity. And I'm thinking cadence might be the same. That's just a question that I have. I'd like to answer it. So that would be an intriguing one for me.
And you mentioned that the heart rate doesn't reflect intensity in type 2 diabetic. Why is that?
It could be neural input, right? It could be, and again, I'm venturing into my interdisciplinary expert territory that we've had discussions. Physiologists will say, it could be the relationship and how the physiological output is adjusted with somebody who has a neural condition related to type 2 diabetes. But because of this, I'm going, okay, so what I'm used to seeing in an intensity cadence relationship might be disrupted in people with type 2 diabetes. And that's, like I say, that's an intriguing question that I'd like to investigate a little bit more if I have time.
Yeah, and if we move a little bit to advice for the early career researchers, you have get a lot of grants. What would be your advice for early career researcher when applying?
You got to fail a lot. Oh my gosh. Everybody says, "Oh my God, Catrine, how have you been successful?" And I says, "Because I failed a lot." And anyone who's succeeded has failed a lot. And you learn every time you fail. You learn something a little bit more from your critics, from the experience. And the next time you go in, you're better prepared. And I'm still doing that. I mean, I'm still putting in grants. I'm still failing. I'm still learning. I'm still going back in again. So fail, but be persistent and resilient. Shake it off and just get back in there and do it again. I work with faculty, the same thing, same message, stomp your feet and shake your fist at the sky for a few minutes, get it out of your system, and then just tuck in and just do what you need to do to get the thing that you really believe in. And, that's what I would say to young people. It's challenging. It's very rewarding. But, you surround yourself with great people and get the support you need and you keep pushing.